Hello everyone, this is Tonelli. Welcome to a new one chord a week video. Today's chord is so beautiful and simple to use. It's just great. The only problem with it is that you might end up like me and start using it everywhere and you won't be able to control yourself. The Sus2 chord is used in all styles of music. I won't give you the list today because it really does appear everywhere. And it's a very ambiguous chord because we'll see right away in the formula section on this video, it lacks the information that you need to know if it's major or minor. So in that sense, it's kind of reminiscent of the power chord. Here's a link in case you missed the video, or the fifth chord. And just like that one, is quite simple to use and it will really enrich your playing. And it's something that I find extremely fascinating about this chord, how I can start with it and then take it pretty much anywhere I want. So let's see how it's built and then we'll take it from there. The Sus2 chord is made up of only 3 notes and is very simple, and the root of course is C. Now, I know I say this in every video, but just in case you jumped into this series today with this specific chord, I always teach you these chords in the key of C. So the root is always C, and then by the end of this series, you'll have watched dozens of videos and learned dozens of chords, and they're all in the key of C, which means then you'll be able to compare the sound of each one of them, and sometimes it's easier to figure out what you're doing in the key of C, just because it's a simple key. And from then on, of course, you'll have to learn how to apply it to every key and to use them for modulations, and all that good stuff. And we might discuss that in the future. But for now, C. All right, so the root is the note C that I have, for example, here. And then the second of this chord, the Sus2, 2 stands for a major second. The major second is a note that is found 1 whole step above the root. Okay, so from C, if you go up a whole step, you find a D. Okay, so we have a C as the root and a D as the second. And then we round it out with the fifth, which is the usual fifth, G. Okay, the second, you can find it here in the same octave as your root, or sometimes you'll find it an octave higher, which sounds a little bit mellower, right? But of course, we'll look at all that when we talk about the positions. And here's the sound of the Sus2 chord. It's a beautiful sound, one of my favorite chords actually. And the reason it's one of my favorites is because this chord doesn't tell you if it's major or minor, right? So in that sense, again, it's similar to the power chord. The reason it doesn't say if it's major or minor is because the third is missing. As we saw in the formula, there was no third at all. And if you remember from the major chord, the chord, here's a link in case you need it, is root, major, third, fifth. And then when we move to the minor chord, it was root, minor, third, fifth. So the third is responsible for a chord being major or minor. Now, in this case, we removed the third and replaced it with a second. And the second doesn't have that kind of information. It doesn't have the kind of effect on a chord and on a root. And so this chord really isn't major nor minor. But as always with these kind of chords, when you join a few chords together, then amongst them, they will complete each other, right? So you can't just go out and pop them in anywhere without thought, because even though this chord isn't major nor minor, if I play any other chord that does have, for example, an E, this E together with this C will tell you that this first chord is a C major. All right, again, if you go back to the fifth chord, there's an explanation of this, but that's the idea. So even though the specific chord doesn't give you all the information, it doesn't mean you can just take it lightly and just use them randomly. All right, so that's one thing. The other thing that's interesting about this chord is that it's made up of 2 fifths. All right, so if you look at it, we have from the root to the fifth, which is from C to G, and then we have from G to D is another fifth. And the fifth is the most stable of all intervals outside of the octave. All right, so when you put 2 of them together, I think it really contributes to this chord sounding so mellow and light and airy and very suggestive. So that's one reason. Another interesting thing about the sound of this chord is that if I look at it as an inversion, it becomes another suspended chord called the Sus4 chord, which we haven't looked at yet, but we will very soon in another video. So let's check it out. If I look at this Sus2 chord, there's C, root, D, second, and G, fifth, then I have a Sus2 chord. But if I were to look at the same notes, if I were just to look at them in a different order, then I would maybe look at G as the first note, C as the second note, and then D as the third note. In that case, this would sound like a G suspended fourth, which again we looked at very soon, but the sound of it is different, but it's still suspended, so you still don't know if it's major or minor. There's also two little things that I would like to clarify about this chord that are often confused. One of them is that this chord is not an add 9 chord. Remember, we looked at the major add 9 chord. That chord is a major chord plus a second. Okay, so it's a major chord, but then we add a major second. This chord does not have a third, so the major second replaces the third. All right, so that's a big difference. It's a huge difference. All right, so keep that in mind. Add 9, either major or minor, is very different than Sus2. And the other thing that I would like to clarify is that I often hear people say that these chords are called suspended because they're neither major nor minor, so they just sound like they're suspended. Is not correct. The reason they're called suspended is because in the classical theory of harmony, for example, if you read the Schoenberg books or the Piston books, you'll see this device called suspension, which means when a note from a chord is held until resolution into another chord, right? And but in rock and you know, modern music, we don't worry about it with this chord. Okay, so we don't have to have this D here become part of the next chord. We could go from this C Sus2 to a next chord that has a D, and so this D will become part of the next chord, right? But we don't have to. We can go pretty much anywhere. But that's where the suspended thing comes from. All right, just a little bit of trivia for you. Like every week, let me show you 3 fingerings for this chord. The first one starts in the open position but is movable, so it's possible to move it all across the fretboard. And it goes like this. We have the 3rd fret on the 5th string, which is our C. And we continue with the Sus2 triad, so we have D on the 4th string, open string, and G on the 3rd, all right? And then we just double a few notes. We have a C here on the 1st fret of the 2nd string, and a G on the 3rd fret of the 1st. If you wanted to double this D instead of the C, then all you have to do is this. And it will sound a bit more towards the Sus2 than towards the regular root, which is C. The next fingering is one I abuse and is the following. We have the root on the 3rd fret of the 5th string. Then we have the G on the 5th fret of the 4th string. And finally the Sus2, or better said major 2nd, the D on the 3rd string, 7th fret. This can of course be moved to other sets of strings, and you should explore that. And the 3rd position is a bit brighter, a bit higher up in register, and we're going to play like this. We'll do the root here is on the 10th fret of the 4th string. Then we go to the D, which is our 2nd, on the 7th fret of the 3rd. And then 8th fret on the 2nd string is G. And we repeat the 2nd on the 10th fret of the 1st string. And this is, again, a Sus2 chord. Again, if you, instead of repeating this D, you want to repeat the root here on the 8th fret, go right ahead. You can just move them around, as long as you always play a C, a D, and a G at least. And finally, as far as scales go, I will keep it very simple today because I think it exemplifies the sound of the chord itself. So this chord is neither major nor minor, as we said, and so I would suggest you try it with both the major and minor scale. It's a simple thing to say, but it will open up many ideas for you, because you'll find that this chord can take on different colors just depending on how you play on top of it. So if I'm playing major, you'll get this kind of effect, but then I can as quickly move towards the minor. Same chord. It's a beautiful concept and something that I've used many times in my own songs, maybe too many. Very well, I hope you enjoyed the video on the Sus2 chord, and I hope you find it as fascinating as I do. Soon we'll explore its relative, the Sus4 chord, but in the meantime try to introduce it into your own progressions. Right, just be careful that it is made up of 3 notes, and these 3 notes will have to agree with the key you're in. All right, so again, if you're new here and you haven't done so, please consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video. I would love to hear your comments about this and other chords and how it's coming along for you. And I will see you very soon with a new video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.